This past summer, Tammy and I took a vacation to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary. We went down to the Caribbean. We had days filled with relaxing by the pool, reading on the beach, a workout or two in the gym. The resort was lovely. There was a mix of people from all over the country and really all over the world. If there were any other Jews at the resort, I didn't know that, which was really the sign of a true rabbinic vacation. We met some nice and interesting couples, many of whom were also celebrating milestone anniversaries or on their honeymoon. We met one couple and became friendly with them. They're about 10 years older than us. They had just gotten married. They were from New England, a place that I had lived before. We bonded at the poolside dance party, had an Asian-Peruvian fusion dinner, and spent most of our times sharing stories about ourselves, how we met, what we do. Not surprisingly, when they learned that I was a rabbi, their curiosity was piqued. As New Englanders, of course, they have met and interacted with our brethren up north. The bride was especially excited to learn about this. And later she confessed that she had always wanted to be Jewish, and that fate must have brought us together. She even used the word beshert. Oh, really? I asked. You want to become Jewish? Why? Well, she said, I've always loved the Jews that I've met. You're such a family-oriented people. When I've been to bar mitzvahs, it always seems so lovely and wonderful. Plus, I'm really good at shopping and getting a bargain. I have to admit, I wasn't exactly sure how to respond. Of course, I knew in my kishkas that I and we, the Jewish people, had just been offended. She just reiterated a well-known stereotype to my face without even thinking twice about it. It was an act of casual anti-Semitism in the form of, I like this stereotypical trait that we think Jews have. She probably thinks of it as a trait worthy of a compliment, not a stain on our people's reputation. But it was offensive. On the other hand, through our conversations up to that point, when Tammy and I had shared our professional experiences and they asked interested and inquiring questions, expressed empathy when the topic of recent tragedies that had befallen our people had come up, and generally appeared to be, and I believe are, good, well-meaning, and well-intentioned people. I have to give credit to Tammy, who was able to find her words faster than I could. She calmly and straightforwardly explained to the error in her thinking, that what she thought was a quirky compliment was actually an anti-Semitic aspersion. She immediately apologized, and we didn't return to it for the rest of the trip. I came home relaxed, with something to talk about and think about. And I pray they went home a little more informed. Would that my experience this past June was the extent of the anti-Semitism that our world has to give us. But alas, that tragically isn't the case. This past year has been a painful one for our community, particularly here in the U.S., and a disappointing departure from the trajectory we thought we were on. For a few generations, there has been this feeling of the lifting of the fog of anti-Semitism and the welcoming of our people in ways that we have never imagined before. By so many measures, our people are enjoying safety and security, success and prosperity that Jews have never seen. Our older generations can remember the time of the signs, no Jews and no dogs, or no Jews and no blacks, were commonly found in businesses and restaurants. Longtime Boca residents know the city's own history. But today we can chuckle if we think for a moment about how many Jews live in neighborhoods named for that rabid anti-Semite Addison Meisner, including me. Anti-Semitism is no longer acceptable in polite company, thank God. Along with other forms of hatred like homophobia, misogyny, and racial animus. But that doesn't mean that there are no more anti-Semites or no more anti-Semitism. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The hateful events in Charlottesville, in Pittsburgh, in Poway headline a litany of anti-Semitic episodes in the last several years. The list includes seemingly random acts of violence, like those in Miami and Crown Heights, graffiti of swastikas and other hateful words and symbols, public officials showing their mix of prejudice and ignorance by minimizing the significance of the Holocaust, not just to Jewish history, but to the history of our nation and of humanity. Just in the last month, the city council president of Trenton, New Jersey, used the phrase "Jew them down" in a city council meeting. And when asked about it, said that she didn't think there was anything offensive about it at all. That Jews sit in the U.S. Congress, on the Supreme Court, work in the White House and throughout the executive branch, have been elected to offices throughout the country, have professorships and presidencies of universities, win Nobel and other prizes, live alongside our neighbors of other faiths, are just a few examples of our success in modern America. But we know what's out there. To adapt Charles Dickens' famous words, "In the best of times, it is the worst of times." At no moment was that more true or more relevant than on the morning of November 2nd of last year, when the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran the banner headline, "Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah," in memory of the 11 souls who perished at the Tree of Life shooting. If 11 Jews are murdered because they are Jews sitting in shul on Shabbos morning, something terrible has happened. When the local award-winning secular newspaper makes a poignant statement of support, of empathy, of consolation, and of mourning, something incredibly powerful has happened. The Atlanta newspapers did not mourn for Leo Frank when he was lynched in 1915. They just reported the news. But in the wake of one of the worst tragedies in American Jewish history, the community stood with us, cried with us, mourned with us in the way that we mourn for ourselves. That weekend, when the American Jewish Committee invited everyone to show up for Shabbat, our congregations were full. We had an overflow crowd here at Temple. The back door was open to add more seating. On that Shabbat, I was on retreat with our 9th graders. We've been planning a trip to spend Shabbat at Congregation Sons of Israel in St. Augustine. Their congregation was excited that our group was going to help them make their minyan, which they often struggled to do. But that night, they had an unexpected crowd of dozens and dozens. Some of the Jews of the area who never come to shul came out that night. But even more than that, the largest segment of the crowd were neighbors from within St. Augustine who are not Jewish, but who came to synagogue that night to stand with us. We know that this new anti-Semitism is coming from all sides, coming from both ends of the ideological spectrum, from the left and from the right. From the right, it's that white nationalist, neo-Nazi hatred of Jews that we've come to recognize from generations past. When they marched in Charlottesville and cried, "The Jews will not replace us," they were reiterating the centuries-old conspiracy theory that our people have a power, a global connectivity, and the desire to manipulate world events. They believe that we will wield that power and influence to enable people of color to supplant white Christian Americans from their positions of power. It's scary. Because as we saw in Pittsburgh and in Poway and El Paso and in Christchurch, and in previous years in Charleston, South Carolina, in Oklahoma City, in the lynchings of the civil rights era, those motivated by white supremacy are not afraid to use violence, menacing behavior, and threatening language to scare, to maim, and to kill. From the left, it may not appear as threatening, but anti-Semitism is alive and well. In many circumstances, it is based on animosity towards the world's only Jewish state and their grotesque double standards to which so many hold her. On university and college campuses, in the halls of the United Nations, at protest rallies against other forms of hatred and bigotry, we have seen too many people single out Israel and Israelis, and ever more frequently Jews who have no affiliation with the state of Israel, other than their Judaism, for condemnation and for exclusion. Scholars who are invited to campus are shouted down by protesters, while admittedly anti-Semitic heads of state are invited to speak. Students running for campus government's leadership positions are subjected to questions about their partiality, or have their positions stripped for voicing support for the Jewish people's right to live in freedom and security in Israel. It is bigoted, it is unfair, it is anti-Semitic. Israel is currently in the midst of a second election process in 6 months, maybe second of 3. And in great part because there are deep divisions within Israeli society about the vision for her future. Questioning the wisdom of a policy decision or an action of the state is not on its face anti-Semitism. It could in fact be just the opposite, an act of Zionistic patriotism, wishing better for the state. But make no mistake, holding Israel to higher standards, like impugning its record on civil rights, while ignoring the behaviors of, Syria, Iran, Russia, China, or declaring the desire for the Jewish people to live safely in our ancestral homeland is an act of racist colonial oppression, or in the most base form, seeking the end of the state of Israel, is by definition anti-Semitism. These beliefs too are results of a conspiracy theory, that Jews and white Europeans conspire to use their power to displace the quote-unquote indigenous Palestinian population and create a Jewish state. In one moment, we go from being the victims of the worst genocide humanity has ever seen to being a willing accomplice to another act of white European terror. It's this false narrative that animates this new form of anti-Semitism that is becoming ever more popular in progressive circles. It's particularly painful for many Jews who want to see ourselves in solidarity with other oppressed minorities which in previous generations we have stood shoulder to shoulder with, and then to see members of those minorities lambast Israel and Zionism in such a hateful way. Even though the historical record disproves the theory, still it persists. That's one of the challenges of confronting conspiracy theories, and why anti-Semitism has stood the test of time. From deicide to the blood libel, from racial inferiority to European colonialism, the lies at the core of anti-Semitism have made their way around the world, while the truth is still putting its shoes and its kippah on. Whether it is the conspiracy of the right or the conspiracy of the left, we know it to be wrong. But the problem with confronting a conspiracy theory is that it does not respond to reason or to logic. It is itself illogical, its reasoning corrupted. So what do we do? Try Gewalt? Sure. Go ahead, try. Yeah. But then we get to work. Despite the perniciousness of anti-Semitism, its ability to meander its way through history to the present day, it doesn't mean that we are powerless to confront it. Quite the opposite, we owe it to ourselves and the generations that will come after us to do all that we can to minimize its influence now and diminish its capacity and capability for future harm. First things first, we must always be educating ourselves. Anti-Semitism is an ever-changing virus, mutating from generation to generation, from culture to culture. It manifests differently in the U.S. than in Europe, on the left and on the right, in Christian communities and Muslim communities. While bookcases full of volumes have been written on this subject, we have to stay as up-to-date as we can. And I cannot recommend more two works that have been published in the past year: Deborah Lipstadt's Anti-Semitism Here and Now and Barry Weiss's How to Fight Anti-Semitism. Lipstadt, the famous Holocaust scholar and professor at Emory University, and Weiss, the opinion writer and editor for the New York Times. In each their own ways, they explore the unique characteristics and challenges of how anti-Semitism manifests itself in 2019 and offer powerful insights into confronting it. Their books, their editorials, their appearances on television have brought much needed attention to this issue in the national conversation. And it is incumbent on each of us to take advantage of their wisdom, so that if, and really when, we are confronted with anti-Semitism, in whatever form, we can call it out and shut it down. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism does not stand alone. Hatred of any kind spreads like wildfire, and we see that throughout contemporary society. As Eric K. Ward of the Western States Center has eloquently argued, anti-Semitism forms the theoretical core of white nationalism, which means that the various modern forms of hatred are in many ways interrelated, and the targets are other minority groups like us. The old saying that goes, the hate that starts with the Jews doesn't end there. It works both ways. Whenever hate arises against any minority, it will eventually find its way to us. When we see hatred of any kind, let us stand up and speak out against it, for the good of our neighbors and for the good of ourselves. At the same time, we need to recognize our allies and thank them when they do so for us. What has given me hope throughout this tumultuous year is how the outside community has stood with us in response to the rise in anti-Semitism. After the shooting in Pittsburgh, I received a text from one of the Methodist pastors in town. She wrote, "Although I will never pretend to understand what the Jewish people deal with on a daily basis, please know that this hateful atrocity has hurt me on a most personal level." Her church was part of the over 2,500 residents of Greater Boca Raton who gathered that week for a vigil, with hundreds of Muslims and Christians, people of color, civic leaders, law enforcement officials, and clergy of all stripes to say to us Jews, we are with you. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism. This congregation and this community is blessed to have these strong interfaith partners, and the relationships are getting both stronger and wider with each year. Let us continue to stand together and celebrate the diversity that makes us a stronger bulwark against all forms of hate. We recognize that for some like Deborah Lipstadt and Barry Weiss and thousands of Jews and others, confronting anti-Semitism is not just a concern, but their vocation. They work for great organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, Southern Poverty Law Center, American Civil Liberties Union, and their research and their activism ensures that the entire world has its eyes opened to the realities of the day by tracking anti-Semitic incidents, researching ideologies that cause them, and offer strong policy suggestions for confronting it. Let me once again hold up and highlight the work of Eric K. Ward and the Western States Center, who our movement has welcomed to address us this year at our consultation on conscience. As a person of color, he's rejected the temptation that left-leaning anti-Semitism that too many in his community have embraced. And he works hard to show how Jews and people of color ought to see each other not as enemies, but of a band of brothers and sisters in fighting against hate. His multicultural, multifaceted approach is both sobering and inspiring. We need that inspiration, because we cannot deny that the reality over the past few years is that we are increasingly under threat. We are here today with the protection of both the Boca Raton Police Department and our own private security team. Each year we seem to need more and more protection. We can admit to ourselves that this is scary. But let it not blind us from all the goodnesses that being a Jew in 5780 offers to us. Let us be prudent in protecting ourselves, in standing up for ourselves, without resorting to foxholes or panic rooms. Let our institutions be secure, but hospitable and welcoming. We can be afraid, but let us not be fearful. Finally, and most importantly, as we enter into this new year, let us remember why we care about anti-Semitism. Because we are pro-Semites. We are Jews who are committed to the thousands of years of our tradition. We relish in the opportunities to express and share the values of our Torah and our tradition, to teach them to our neighbors and to our children. We excitedly await each coming holiday and festival so that we can sit in the sukkah, light the Chanukiah, and enjoy that bite of matzah with a sense of simcha, of joy. We seek to connect our souls and the Holy One through moments of worship and prayer. When we bat down anti-Semitism, we bat down hate in all of its forms. We are commanded to be an or l'goyim, a light unto the nations, to illuminate the world with our values of love and of peace. As we navigate the darkness of anti-Semitism, let us remember that as we light our festive candles, we diminish the darkness and bring light to this moment and to the world. Shana Tova.